Thank you for being here. It means a lot to me, and it's hard to believe that people get dressed and like get on trains and drive to a place just to hear me speak. It just still astounds me, and so I'm just grateful for your presence.
It's funny that like so many of the like bios describing you will be like, oh, you describe yourself as crabby, but I feel like one of the experiences I've always had with you, I don't even remember how I met you or when I met you.
A long time ago.
It was a long time ago, but I felt like I always just wanted to be next to you because I was like, you're gonna like whisper snarky, funny things, and I'm not gonna feel alone in this room. And you felt exactly like that person. Reading your book feels like you're sitting next to a really like fun friend who's going through it, but you feel open to it. And my guess, I say all of that is because I guess a lot of people had that feeling reading your book or encountering your work, and that there's something really fun about actually being in a room with you.
Oh, that's so sweet. I think about being a young Mexican girl in Cicero, growing up. If you've seen Cicero, you understand it looks kind of desolate. It's depressing in various forms. People are going through a lot. There's a lot of poverty. Factories everywhere. So I grew up like with this environment, this backdrop, and not really having the opportunity to thrive or to be seen, to be myself. And so now that, in fact, who I was a problem, hence the title, Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, right? And so to now be in a position where people are like, oh, she's pretty cool, also it astounds me because for so long I was just writing poems in my journal, crying my eyes out, and trying to make it out of Cicero.
Yeah, I think about a lot, like one of the things you talk about in the book is that there are so many people whose brilliance we might never know because they're growing up in these communities where maybe who they are is not encouraged, or there aren't that many opportunities to write or to think about like the arts as a life. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering now how it feels. Like we were talking a little bit in the green room. My daughter is a 9th grader at Westinghouse, and they're all reading I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. And I'm wondering how it maybe feels to go from being in this place where you feel like it's just me in my journal crying, and to now like children all over CPS and the United States are like, this is my jam, this book is so good.
I just couldn't have imagined it. And so I always approach that with gratitude, again, because I feel I know what it could be. Like, I know what my mom went through. I know what other women in my family went through. And I have such an extraordinary life. And every day, I swear to God, I say, wow, I can't believe this is mine. And I built this life. And I feel like also my body hasn't caught up because I'm still a little bit tense at times, where I just feel like things are gonna go wrong even when everything's perfectly fine. And it's that trauma from my mother, from living a life as a brown woman and having to fight for every scrap. And so I wanna just like chill out and rest and enjoy it, receive it. But I haven't really gotten there yet. I'm close.
Well, I was going to ask about this later because you said I could, like thinking about the DePaul fiasco scandal. I see a theater school at DePaul University.
Boo.
Hey, boo. I'm like, hi, boo. But one of the things that you posted. Well, do you want to describe what happened from your point of view, or do you want me to describe?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so DePaul, which is the largest Catholic institution in the country, the university had a huge budget shortfall last year, or a huge budget projection shortfall I think that's important. And so they laid off 5 full-time faculty, and one of them was Erika, and everyone was kind of baffled by that choice because DePaul serves a lot of Latinx students, a lot of students from the Chicago area, and I think like you were like one of the only faculty who's Mexican American from Chicago. Like your books are bestsellers, you're getting made into a movie. You know, like I was like, of all the people who you would think like, yes, what a score for a Chicago university would be you. And you made this post that like made me so sad and angry at the time of like, no matter what you do, it feels like maybe it will never be enough.
Yeah, academia, institutions, we're often seen as disposable, I'm just thinking of like, also my parents, the way they worked, and they were just seen as machines, right? And so I don't think that people often see my value, and I don't know if they knew about my teaching and what I was about. Like whoever made those decisions, like I don't know what they knew about me, but it was very symbolic to students that one of the only Latinas on campus from Chicago, all of that. And I had excellent evaluations. I had a great time teaching. I loved teaching. I put my whole self into teaching. And so to have them then discard me, like I don't matter, and to still expect me to show up for work, telling me like, oh, you're not gonna get your contract renewed, but you still have to finish out the quarter. And I said, absolutely not. I have more dignity than that. Like, if you don't want me, you don't want me. You don't get me. And you never will, again, So I've taken all this hurt that I felt about it, and I've channeled it into my art, and I've moved on. I did have to mourn the loss of that because it was very important to me, but I can't make people value me. I can't make people know how great I am. It's just like, if you don't want me here, then I will leave. And now that I'm on my own completely, I'm just writing and speaking, I feel liberated because absolutely no one tells me what to do besides my daughter, who is 3. So it's like a new phase of my life that I've entered, and there's been a lot of healing. Now that I have more time and space, I get to, do all sorts of cool stuff, interview señoras all over the city for this next project I'm working on. I have a podcast called No Chingues, which is just a blast to record. We don't even care about any of the results. We just like really love to do it, and we hope that people will also love it. And yeah, I've been working on a bunch of projects. So that is all to say that it was unfortunate, but I have made the most of it, and I think my life just keeps getting better.
That makes me think about, like, first, one of the things that I think you've talked about many times, including a little bit here, is like, at some point, these institutions were not built to affirm people like you, And so, like, the constant pursuit of, like, recognition from people is in a context where, like, this was designed with a whole other sense of talent or humanity or, like, experience in mind. And I love that you kind of reiterate that in so many different ways in your writing of, like, really, like, saying, no matter what you think, here's what I think, and here's my experience of it.
Yeah, I feel like institutions are always puzzled by me just because I do so many different things. I have many opinions. I have a very radical approach to teaching, and sometimes I wonder if that had anything to do with, the contract issue, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's something that I think is really important for young women to understand, is that you don't have to be liked by everyone. You you can just be who you are, and everything else will follow. And those who don't get it, don't get it. And so I see that in my experience, this sort of reclaiming of who I am and what I do, and also understanding that institutions have really traumatized me. I've had many bad experiences in academia, and it's not friendly to people like me, because people don't think I'm that I'm intelligent sometimes, or that I know what I'm talking about, or what have you. I could, accomplish a million more things, and it's just not important. It doesn't matter. I'm still a brown woman, and yeah, that gets pretty old. Anyway, that's a rant.
I love a rant. Let's have 10 more. We have time. But I think like the thing that I find so interesting about this book, the one you could buy out there in the lobby, crying in the bathroom, is like you describe a wide range of truly horrible things. Like you basically start the book with like a horrible vagina problem that lasts for 7 years, right? Like,
yeah.
But in all of it, yeah, I was like, do you want to pause and talk about vagina problems? I had a different question, but it was like, starting there and like going through institutions and bad relationships, and like so much of what is at the core there is that in so many of these cases you knew something wasn't right, and that you were getting all of these messages like, no, you're not right. And that the more you settled into being yourself, and accepting like, yeah, I'm gonna have, like, I love that joke about your brother like handing you a ladle instead of a spoon to make fun of you, because you have a big mouth, or, like the more you do that, the more people like you. It's like Bell Hooks, in All About Love. She's like,
I love her.
Most of us feel like we've never been loved because most of us project this version of ourselves out into the world that is like this version we think is lovable, but then that's who people love, not us on the inside.
Right. Yeah. I always had these ideas growing up that were very counter to my environment. I was very feminist, very young. Thank you, Lisa Simpson. And I was always talking about the distribution of labor in the house, and I didn't want to like heat up tortillas for my brothers, things like that. And so I feel like I'm the same person. I'm the same annoying little teenager in some ways, because I've gone through my journals and I was pissed about the same shit. It's unbelievable. I was like, wait a minute. I was thinking about generational trauma. I was writing about, poverty, all sorts of stuff. And it's just so reassuring to know that that's who I am and that's who I'm always gonna be. And I think in this era of social media, we can construct images of who we are, sure. But like, does it matter ultimately, is that bringing value and meaning into your life to post, the cereal that you're eating or whatever the hell, like it makes me really question it. And so I have a new relationship with it.
So I want to ask about, like, I'm focusing mostly on this book, which felt, well, something you talk about. I have like two questions in my head. I'm trying to sort out which one. I'll ask the first one and then go to the second one if it makes sense. That a couple times in the book, you make a joke about like eat, pray, love, you know, like, and there's this way in which like you quote Rebecca Solnit, and you're talking about hope, you know, like you're in the middle of describing all of these like terrible things, but there is something so hopeful about the whole book. Even, and I find that contradiction so real, you know, to like lay out all of this mess and be like, but I'm still going to invest in a future self, is the tone of the book.
Yes, and thank you for that interpretation. I really love that. It's a sort of, I don't want to call it a manual, but I want this book to serve as inspiration for young women to do what it is that they want to do, the life that they want to keep going. And yeah, in the book, there are many very dark moments, and I still have trouble reading parts of the book, but there's also a lot of joy and happiness and love, and I want that to be in every book of mine. I want to show the gritty, the real, the unfortunate, but I also want to show how vast the human spirit is, and especially Mexicans. I just love the way that we can turn death and tragedy into something that is funny, to be able to laugh at the ridiculous situations in our lives. And I just grew up, you know, with family working in factories, talking shit about work and laughing, and, you know, like there's so much, there's so much beauty in our culture, in our community.
Yeah, I think about like something I do a lot is trauma laughing, where like the more upset I am about something, the more jokes I make, or the more I'll be like, ha 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 ha, like they killed them, ha 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 ha. And it's not that I think it's funny, but I don't know any other way of managing how I feel about it than to make jokes. And I find that like when you make jokes around certain kinds of Americans, like phrasing them broadly, they're just like,
White
what's wrong with you? Huh?
White Americans?
Even a certain kind of white American, you know,
Okay,
because I feel like people who are like, maybe like Appalachian white people
Sure.
are also sort of similar. I do think it's sort of like, you talk about it in the context of Mexicanness, but I think it's like in the context of people who have to be daily survivors and who have to find like joy and places for release outside
exactly.
of where they are, you know?
Which is why we used to party so hard when we were like 4 years old. I don't know if any of you ended up on a chair, falling asleep. It's something that I think is really funny, but also sad now that our families were so traumatized by being here, that and traumatized by what came before they got here as well. And so, you know, we would have these really wild parties, little kids just strewn about, sleeping, you know. And it's because the adults needed that joy, that celebration. And I find that really beautiful now. But I did not as a child, that's for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you talk about, like, you have so much empathy for your parents in the book, you know, of like, but that you can see, like, there's a part where you describe, like, your mom being at work, your dad just kind of zoned out in the TV, and that the result is that you spent so much time alone. Mm-hmm. And I do think that happens also, of like, what does it mean to hold children? You know, like there's so much like this idea of like calladita, you know, like that you have to be quiet, you have to be obedient to your parents, which you obviously weren't, or at least per your self-description.
I mean, it's all true, as true as I could get it.
I didn't mean to accuse you of being a liar.
No, I have a great deal of empathy for my parents, and in fact, just this morning, they were picking up my daughter because she loves her grandparents, and she stays over sometimes. And my parents came over to get her, and they said, they told us all sorts of stories that I didn't know about. Like, my dad told me he saw like a dead child dressed as a saint that was put in a chair when he was a kid. And my mom was telling us that, she didn't know what money was until she was 8. And, sometimes they wouldn't have food on Christmas, like not even Christmas. And so once I started thinking about all of this, I have like opened up my heart more to understand what they went through and to understand why they were the parents that they were. And so that has required a lot of work, and I'm also writing a novel about a woman of my mom's generation who immigrates to the United States, and I have to really dig into those details of what it was like, and how hard she worked, and all the things, all the discrimination, humiliation that she must have gone through. And so, yeah, my perspective on them has really changed over the years.
Do you feel like having that new perspective on your parents changes your perspective on yourself?
Oh, God, yes, I suppose so. I give myself my younger self a lot of affection, because I think that I was struggling so much just to sometimes stay alive. And so I really want to honor that little girl who didn't feel important or seen, whatever. And so I'm able to see myself with more compassion, because I understand the context that I was in. And it's complicated. Sometimes you still feel resentment towards someone who hurt you, even though you understand why they did it. Being human is hard.
That is very true. Yeah, I think a lot about, like, so many of us internalize the things that our parents said to us or that our families said to us, and a lot of times it really has nothing to do with us. It has to do with their own capacity at any given moment to care, or to love, or to really see another person. But it's hard when it's the person raising you.
Yeah, and it's not that people want to traumatize their children. Obviously, it's just all they know. And so that's something that needs to be broken. And I feel responsible with my life to do so. I have all these privileges. I worked my ass off, but it was only possible because my parents came here. And I feel that, I don't know, it's becoming a mother, I will say, just has changed me very, very profoundly in how I see everything.
Yeah, I have one child, and my mother struggled with mental illness. She was undiagnosed bipolar for most of my childhood, and she had multiple children. And I think about, like, I have so many more resources than she does, and there's still so many days where I'm just like, I cannot with this child right now.
Yeah.
The one.
I know. I think about that too. All the señoras, our grandmas who had 10 children, who lost children, all the trauma that must be in their heart still. Both of my grandmothers are still alive. And so, anyway, I always think about their lives as well as my mother's, and how they didn't have enough to buy salt. Like, one of them couldn't feed her children, for a while. Things like that. How that is relevant to me still, the fact that they went through that. I'm really sorting through a lot of stuff with this new novel, and I'm interviewing lots of señoras, and they they share their really incredible stories. And what's funny, I think, sometimes with them is they tell me a terrible thing that happened to them, and they're like, it wasn't that bad, you know? And I'm over here horrified. I'm like, I can't believe you survived that. And they're just laughing about it, like, whatever. And again, the human spirit and finding resilience with humor and with community as well. Yeah. Now that I'm a señora, I think about señora stuff, you know. I got a lot of plants.
So I have a question for you about Spanish in your book.
Sure.
And one of the things that I admired in your writing is like, you don't often translate words in Spanish or put them in italics. And I'm wondering if you had to like fight with your editors about that.
I didn't, because they're cool.
Okay.
And I'm really grateful that I have such great editors. No one pushed back on that. And I use Spanish in a way that I'm speaking to my community. Like, you know, I want the language to feel familiar, but also I want, you know, to have other people understand the context. I don't want people to be completely lost. So it's like this delicate balance where I'm not, I don't know, I want to fuse both languages together because that's how I speak, but that's just not how I write necessarily. And it's still in English. English is my dominant language. Spanish sometimes gives me anxiety. I speak it fine, but I think as, you know, first generation kid, sometimes you feel embarrassed and, But at the same time, I celebrate it, and I think it's cool to have two languages, and I'm passing it down to my daughter, and I think that's really great. And she doesn't judge me if I mispronounce something, or say the wrong word, or what have you. And so it's been really great for me to celebrate that part of myself with my daughter, and to have her have language that I grew up with and make jokes in Spanish and things like that.
I loved when you talked about that, like being bilingual, but feeling like you don't have the same capacity in Spanish. Like you were talking about being in Spain, and you're like, I promise I'm funny. I'm funny in English, you know? And I was thinking about how, like, I've spoken Spanish my entire life. It's my first language. But I moved here when I was 12, so I did middle school, high school, college, and graduate school in English. So my vocabulary in English is really expansive. I feel like I can twist words. And in Spanish, I can't even remember how to say garbage can sometimes. I'm like, la cosa esa, mira, para la basura, basurero.
It happens to me too. It's frustrating, and I want to have like a really strong foundation of Spanish. But it's a constant struggle. It's work. You have to be intentional, and I think me and my daughter speaking Spanish is really great for us. And you know, I'm grateful to be able to hand this down to her as well.
I'm jealous of that because my daughter like absolutely refused to let me speak to her in Spanish.
Oh,
like
wow.
I would decided when she was born, my partner doesn't speak Spanish. So I was like, I'm gonna speak to her in only Spanish, gonna have a bilingual baby. And she would tell me in Spanish, no mami, no hablo español. I'm like, pero si estás hablando español. You know, like, she's like, I would read her a book in Spanish. She'd be like, no. And one time we were walking to the doctor, and an African-American woman, like, and I specify race because there was, you know, there are plenty of black people who speak Spanish, but there also wasn't an immediate reason to assume that this person was referring to Spanish at all. Said to my daughter, like, hey, sweetie, good morning. And she was like, I don't speak Spanish. I only speak English. And I was like, damn, like, what is like wrong with you? And now she's like, I can't believe you didn't teach me Spanish. I could have been bilingual. I'm like,
exasperating. Oh
yeah.
My goodness. Kids, wait until you're ready, for real. It's tough.
That is really, really hard. What other señora stuff have you been getting into?
Guilt trips. Just kidding. I don't do that. I really love cooking. I love making like pozole and mole and hearty Mexican food. And yeah, what other señora stuff? Chismeando, with like other señoras. I strike up conversations with other señoras now, just like randomly. And I used to make fun of my mom for that, and now I do it. And so here we are.
It happens. It's like, if your choice is a 3-year-old or a random stranger, sometimes you have to hit up the random stranger. I feel like it's hard to talk about your book without talking about some of the painful stuff that you talk about.
That's all right.
And I was thinking about, you have my copy of the book, I underlined it, I marked it up, I have so many like quotations written in the back. It's like an incredibly quotable book. And there's a point, you're talking about your broken vagina. I promise that's not the only essay I read. I read the whole thing, but I just found like that epic journey so horrifying, of like, what?
It was bad.
I believe it.
I mean, buy the book and find out.
That's the teaser. But at one point you have this beautiful line where you say, "My pain was a ghost." And it reminded me, there's a philosopher, you actually quote Elaine Scarry, a different book
yes.
she has on beauty, but she also has a book called Regarding the Pain of Others, which is basically like physical pain is impossible to describe to another person. Like it's so in our body that we can't, I think about those pain scales. They're always like, is this a 1 to a 10? I'm like, I don't know, right? You're like, who knows? Like,
Yeah.
What are we comparing this to? Childbirth? Like, where are we in this? But actually, when it comes to emotional pain, one of the things that you've done in all of your writing, I think, is make such a clear case for the human in context. The human being you, the context, and to like kind of be unabashed, it seems, as a reader, about like the impact that has on you in terms of emotional pain.
Can you?
Is this a question?
Yeah.
Or is this a comment? And well, I'm just curious about like how you think about that process. Like, do you just sit down and be like, "Here's what's up," or are you like, or thinking more about like, how do I explain this to somebody?
I think I have to explain it to myself first. That's really what drives me. Like I needed to write that book to heal a lot of the things that happened, and so I believe for me writing is spiritual. It's something much bigger than myself, and I feel like my ancestors are speaking through me sometimes, and yeah, it's really difficult to write any book for many reasons, but this one I'm working on right now, it's so difficult to hear people's suffering and to try to make sense of that. Or not sense, you can't really make sense, but to channel all of this trauma and really sit with it and digest it, feel it, and be able to create a body of work, from that. Yeah, but there's always joy. There's always joy, no matter what. Throughout that book, this book right here, on sale downstairs, it's for me a sort of exorcism. Once I wrote this book and it was out and it was moving and people were talking about it and things, like I felt that I could let go of so much. The book was able to like just seal something for me, and then now I'm like ready to traumatize myself some more to write this next one. And I mean, not to make light of trauma, but it's hearing really sad stories about my parents' childhood. That's not an easy thing for me to sit with, knowing how destitute they were and they didn't get to go to school and all of these misfortunes and like how do you take all of that and transform it? And I'm always thinking about transformation in the Buddhist sense where, you take poison and you turn it into medicine. And that's always my goal with every book. And I'm really happy when people tell me that the book helped them see something or learn something about themselves, or it made them feel more confident in making a decision or whatever. That means a lot to me because I really needed that kind of text when I was a young girl.
We're almost to the Q&A, so I'm going to ask you maybe one more question. We'll see how long your answer is.
Okay.
But I'm curious, because I'm a theater person, I have to ask you about the stage production of your novel. Like, what's it like to see people embodying these characters that you wrote for a page?
It was really incredible, overwhelming. I felt like I was out of my body in a sense where it was, I couldn't really grasp the largeness of the thing, that people were saying the words that I wrote, that people were these characters that I created, that this set was made based on the things that I wrote about the neighborhood. It was stunning. It was kind of surreal. It made me really hopeful, and it made me understand the impact that my work can have on people. And so it was kind of a dizzying experience, but I'm really happy with what they did with it. And then there was another run at Seattle Rep Theater, and I got to see that as well, and it was beautiful. And every time I'm like, how did this happen? I continue to be stunned by it all.
Yeah, and did you have a lot of input? I'm curious what it's like, especially a screen, like Isaac, who is the playwright, sort of his take on your work. Did you negotiate that at all, or you would just go for it?
I met Isaac, and I loved his spirit, and I said, just run with it. Do what you need to do. I trust you. And he did it, and he had some questions for me sometimes, and I would answer them, and he just did an extraordinary job. I just feel like when you let people do what they're good at, amazing things happen. And I feel that way about so many parts of my life. I want the artists around me to feel empowered, to feel like they are in control of this project, because they are. I'm just gonna, give it a thumbs up at the end. Thank you so much. Yeah, he did an incredible job adapting it. And he showed me the book that he had underlined, and he had all these notes. It was battered, and I was like, that's just so beautiful to me. Thank you. But to spend so much time with this book that I wrote, Jesus.
Yeah, and he's a queer kid who wears capes, unironically, so I feel like he was really a right person to relate to your book in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, he's just a treasure in so many senses. And with this movie eventually coming out one day, no updates, sorry guys. It's moving along, that's all I can say. But anyway, I want the same thing with the movie. I want to trust that America, for instance, is going to just direct with her, talent and her her humor, all of it, her intelligence, all of it, I feel like it's separate from me now. And so I don't want to, I'm going to be involved, but at the same time, I have to let it go.
It's out there in the world.
Yeah.
So before I ask you only questions about plays now, I'm going to move on to audience questions to make sure you're getting a chance. We see your hand. We're going to just talk through how the Q&A is going to work first, and I pass it to Jojo in the back.
Hello, everyone. Yes, myself and the house manager are going to run some mics around the room, so if you have a question, please raise your hand nice and high. We invite you to stand when you ask your question if you are able to do so, and we ask that you please keep it to questions only and to keep your questions brief. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tanya Leon Moreno, and I'm an MFA creative writing student at Columbia College. And I just wanted to ask you, what words of encouragement do you have about representation, especially for emerging authors, even established authors, who don't see enough of ourselves in this art we love and in academia as well?
Yeah, I feel strongly that we have to support writers by buying their books and not from Amazon. That's one thing. I think sharing what you think about the book online, sharing with your family, just, being able to, I don't know. Could you just re-ask that question? Because I feel like I'm not getting it.
What are your words of encouragement for people who feel that they're underrepresented in this art we love, and also we don't see many people with last names like ours in the academic world?
So the writing world is quite competitive. So I always tell young people who are interested in writing, do you love writing? Does it bring you joy? I think that's one question to ask. But also, if you want to be a writer, I think it's really important to find other people who are writing as well and share work and create different communities where writing is the center. Reading extensively for me is always a piece of advice I give young people who want to be writers, because without having a vast knowledge of literature, it's hard to create literature because you're supposed to be in conversation with what came before. And so, yeah, but the lack of representation, it is getting better, but I feel like the pace is very slow. And what needs to happen is, like really big shifts in the publishing world. But I don't know what we can do about that in particular, but supporting writers by showing up to things like this, thank you, by buying their books, by sharing what you've learned about whatever you learned reading the book. That's what's gonna keep literature alive, if you keep passing it around.
Hi, I had a question about the composition of crying in the bathroom, because your voice is the most resonant thing in the book, and it kind of pulls it all together. But I was curious because the essays have some similar themes but treat different content. I was curious, did the essays exist separately of one another before the book, and then you pulled some of them into the actual text, or did you plan it ahead of time and then write the essays in an order that was clear in your mind as you were composing the book?
I wrote it as a book of essays, and then my publisher said it was a memoir, and I was like, whatever, that's fine. It didn't really change anything for me. I think that all of them are self-contained. That was the intention, and I wanted them to connect, but I didn't imagine it as like a traditional memoir, and that's just kind of what they decided to call it, and I liked that, and I was like, cool, if it sells better, then go ahead. But the way that I wrote was each one was separate, and I had to write one about Buddhism, and I had to write one about this one time. I don't want to give any spoilers, but like I felt like the urge to write about these topics, and somehow they coalesced into a narrative arc. It's not traditional, but it's there.
Got your next question right over here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Audrey. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you.
My question is about transformative art and how writing is healing. How do you sit in the discomfort during your process of writing? Do you have a process, and how do you push through those moments of discomfort in the unknown?
I've actually been using movement and yoga in between my writings, or if I'm stuck, I'll just go stretch and I'll take a walk, things like that. And that is something that has sustained me recently. Just being able to clear my head or have a moment to myself and put things together. Writing isn't just the writing, right? It's the thinking, it's the being in the world, it's looking at art, going to a museum, it's listening to music, it's all of it, and of course reading other books. And so for me, I want to just feel inspired all the time, and that just means seeking inspiration. And that's one way to, I think, be a writer and be a person who pays attention to things, to the things that a lot of people don't, the details. And so my process is very silly. I don't know. I move around. I have a snack. I watch TV. I take another walk. It's just all these different components are in the service of writing.
I'm very excited to be here. I heard your name spoken a few weeks ago, and I was surprised. I had never read your books or heard your name, because I'm also Chicago-based, and I just published a book. I'm especially interested in knowing about education, because I think for many of us who grew up in similar circumstances, I did in New York many decades before you, very limited and not feeling self-assured, two places that made a difference. One was the public library, which I just loved, and the librarians were fairy godmothers, and two particular teachers. So I wondered if you could say anything about any positive roles that maybe schooling, teaching, or libraries played in your life in terms of opening up the world of literature.
Yeah, I had many racist, terrible teachers, but I also had really incredible, wonderful teachers that made me feel that I could be a writer. They saw me for who I was, respected this vocation that I had decided on, and would let me borrow books, things like that. So I've had like really great experiences and really terrible experiences in school. However, I think the person that really made a big difference was my older brother, because he read so many books and he would recommend them to me, and then we would talk about them sometimes, and he would give me poetry that he was learning in college, and I felt like I was given access to things that I didn't have access to before because of him. And to this day, I credit him for a lot of what I am and the path that I chose. And so, yeah, and then there's this one teacher that I always talk about. He made me a packet of poetry that it was personal. It was like he chose all the different poems that he thought I would love, put them in a packet, and I carried that around forever. And I just found it again recently, and I looked at the packet, and I was blown away by how much that packet influenced my writing. And so it's people like him that made me think that it was feasible, that it was possible.
Alrighty, we have time for one last question. As a reminder, there is a book signing immediately following the program, and that will be on the first floor of this building. And patrons, as we end, make sure you please remain in your seats until our panelists have exited. Here is our last question.
Thank you. My name is Edmund Yomtov, and I'm a psychologist and a mental health advocate. And one of the things I'd like to say to you, and thank you for doing, is describing mental health problems, depression, trauma in communities of color, and doing so beautifully in a way that was accessible to myself, a lot of my clients, and so forth. My question to you is, how do you think we address this probably a very underdiagnosed pandemic of mental health problems in communities of color, specifically young women?
Oh, what a big question. I'm no expert. And also, I love it when therapists tell me that their clients read my books, because it makes me feel like I'm doing something right. Man, it's such a vast problem. I mean, there's a lack of resources. There's the lack of people who have degrees in our community. Just historically, we have not been allowed into these spaces. And so it's just bringing awareness to the issue, normalizing it. That's what I try to do. I talk about my mental illnesses quite a bit. And I want my books to show people who struggle also with mental illness that they're not the only one, and that there is hope, and that there are things that one can do to survive it. Those are the types of things that I needed to hear when I was growing up, when I felt like I didn't matter. I wanted to disappear. But fixing this problem is just so complicated. A lot of our families don't understand the value in therapy. They think that makes you crazy. It's about, I guess, educating the community about what it is, and pointing them into the right direction when it comes to help and things like that. But I'm overwhelmed by the thought of how many people are suffering right now for whatever reason. And I don't know, I feel like something has to change soon, because we're at a breaking point, especially after the pandemic. So many young people were so depressed, and still are, and they can't function in society, and it's just a lot. I also think that if someone has access to insurance and can get a therapist, like, why not do that? Do that as a favor to yourself. So yeah, there is hope, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today with Erika Sanchez at the Chicago Humanities Festival. And Erika, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you. I hope you enjoy the book signing, and have a good day.